The first thing Callum McRae noticed when he stepped out of his glossy black Aston Martin onto the cracked driveway of his new Seaside house was the woman next door barefoot, paint splattered, and yelling at a seagull. "Drop it." "That's mine, you little thief." Her eyes locked with his just as the seagull flew away with what looked like a sandwich. "Great," she muttered, brushing her hands on her jeans. "First the sink breaks, now lunch is airborne." Callum blinked, caught off guard not by the bird but by her. She wasn't glamorous, not in a polished city way, but there was something about her messy ponytail, flushed cheeks, and a no-nonsense energy that made him forget the stress of the last 6 months. He gave a polite nod. "Rough day," she raised a brow. "You could say that, you the new guy." "Yeah." "Callum, Aubrey, I'd shake your hand, but it's covered in paint and disappointment." He laughed. Actually laughed. It had been a while. Callum hadn't planned on moving to a sleepy beach town like Windermere Cove. But after years of building his real estate tech company and selling it for more than he ever thought he'd see in his lifetime, his life in New York had stopped feeling like his. So he bought a house off the market, something private, something quiet, something real, and now here he was. Talking to a woman in ripped jeans who didn't bat an eye at his $1,000 shoes. Aubrey turned and walked toward her porch, grabbing a battered toolbox. "If your sink breaks, I'm around, I fix things." "You're a plumber?" "Handyman. Handywoman, technically, I do it all." "And I live right there," she said, pointing to the small white house with wind chimes and flower pots hanging from every window. "Noted," he said, watching her disappear inside. Later that evening, as Callum unpacked his boxes, he glanced out the window. Aubrey was outside again, dragging a ladder toward her garage. The thing looked ancient. He walked over without thinking. "Let me help," she glanced at him. "You don't look like someone who's touched a ladder before." "I haven't." "But I've been told I lift with excellent form." She laughed, surprising herself. "All right, city boy, grab the end." Over the next hour, they repaired a broken gutter, argued about the best pizza place in town, and discovered a mutual love of bad horror movies. When he finally headed back to his house, Aubrey leaned against her fence. "Thanks for helping. Most people just watch." "Most people aren't escaping Manhattan," he said. She tilted her head. "You running from something, running to something, I think. Just haven't figured out what yet." He walked inside before she could ask more. The following week, Aubrey started seeing him everywhere. At the farmer's market, at Beachside Cafe, and once jogging shirtless past her house, something she tried very hard not to stare at. He was quiet, polite, a little awkward, but he listened when she talked. Really listened. When her truck broke down, he showed up in a sleek SUV with tinted windows and said, "Hop in." "I'll drive you." "You're way too fancy for this town," she said as she climbed in, noticing the custom leather seats. "Don't worry, I'm trying to downscale," she snorted. "Right. You probably don't even know what a carburetor is." "I know how to hire someone who does." They drove in silence for a moment before he asked, "You always been here?" "Born and raised. My dad ran a repair shop. When he died, I took over." "It's not glamorous, but it's honest." Callum nodded, his jaw tightening. "Honest sounds good." Something in his tone made her glance over. "You really hate where you came from, don't you?" He hesitated, then said, "I don't hate it. I just don't know who I was anymore. Everything got so loud." "This place, it's quiet." "Well, you're welcome to be loud at my place if you ever need a hammer or a beer," he smiled. "I'll take you up on that." One evening, during a late summer storm, the power went out. Aubrey knocked on his door with a flashlight and a bottle of wine. "You got candles?" "I've got 6 fireplaces, but no candles," she laughed. "Figures. You mind if I crash here? My place is pitch black and my dog's terrified." He looked down at the golden retriever at her feet. "What's his name?" "Bear, of course it is." They sat by the fire, wine between them, Bear curled at their feet. Rain rattled the windows. Aubrey looked at him, really looked. "You're not what I expected," she said. "Neither are you." She leaned her head back against the couch. "What did you expect?" "I don't know. Someone who'd want something from me, who'd ask." "I haven't asked." "I know. That's why I'm still here." They didn't kiss. Not yet. but something passed between them, something heavy and warm and terrifying. A few days later, he showed up at her workshop with a box. Inside was a brand new set of tools, top of the line. She stared at it. "Why would you? You said you've been using your dad's old stuff." "Thought it was time for something new. Callum, this is expensive. I can afford it." She looked up at him. "Who are you?" He paused, then said, "I started a company when I was 22, sold it last year. I'm well off." She crossed her arms. "Define well off." "I could buy the entire block if I wanted." Her mouth dropped open. "You're a millionaire," he nodded slowly. "Is that a problem?" She blinked, processing. "No, I mean maybe, I don't know, you're just not what I thought you were." "Same here," he said quietly. "I didn't expect to come here and meet you either." He reached out, brushing a strand of her hair behind her ear. Her breath hitched. "You changed everything," he whispered, and then finally he kissed her. It wasn't soft or tentative. It was desperate and real and full of something they hadn't said out loud yet. When they pulled apart, she whispered, "This is crazy." "Yeah," he said, "but it feels real." And for the first time in years, it did. The next morning, Callum stood barefoot in his kitchen, staring at a half-assembled espresso machine on the counter. The instructions were spread out like a battlefield, and still, the thing refused to produce even a drop of coffee. He ran a hand through his hair, then glanced at the clock. It was just after 9. Too early to admit defeat, but not too early to knock on the door next door. She opened it wearing a faded hoodie and holding a power drill. "I need caffeine and humility," he said. "You got at least one of those?" Aubrey stepped aside without a word. Her place smelled like cedar and lemon oil. On her kitchen table sat the guts of a toaster oven and a tray of lemon muffins, still warm. "I don't trust machines that cost more than my rent," she said, handing him one. He bit into it, groaning. "You made these?" "No, a baking fairy broke in overnight." She slid the tray back toward the oven. "So what's the espresso monster doing now? It's mocking me. Let's go tame it." They walked back to his place. She bypassed the instructions, flipped the machine over, and popped off a panel. "You've been trying to attach the water line to the milk frother," she said after a minute. He stared. "That's a thing, apparently." She fixed it in under 5 minutes. He poured her the first cup. "You always this good at fixing people's screw-ups?" he asked, handing it over. She took a sip, then looked at him. "Only when they're interesting enough to keep around." That night, she brought over a board game and 2 beers. He opened a bottle of wine instead. "I don't do well with rules," he said, pouring her a glass. She laughed. "You're terrible at games, then." "Only the ones I can't control." They played until the fire burned low. She beat him 3 times in a row, and every time she won, she leaned back with a triumphant grin. "You're not used to losing, are you?" she asked. I'd forgotten what it felt like. Aubrey didn't ask questions about his past. She didn't care about board seats or IPOs or the fact that he'd once been on the cover of a business magazine. With her, he wasn't a headline. He was just a man learning how to live in silence again. A few days later, he found her in the middle of sanding an old wooden cabinet in her driveway. Her headphones were in, and she didn't notice him until he crouched beside her. "Need another set of hands or just someone to admire the view?" She pulled out one earbud. "I thought you were allergic to manual labor." "I've evolved." She handed him a sanding block. "Prove it." They worked side by side, the smell of sawdust thick in the air. He didn't talk, he just followed her rhythm. After they finished, she sat on the porch step, brushing sawdust off her jeans. "You know, you're not terrible at this." "I'll take that as glowing praise." "You should. I don't hand out gold stars." He looked at her, the way the light caught the curve of her jaw, the way her eyes didn't flinch from his. "You ever think about leaving this place?" She tilted her head. "Why?" "You already planning your escape?" "No, I just wonder if you've ever wanted more." "I used to," she said, drawing her knees up. "But I learned something. More doesn't always mean better. Sometimes it just means louder." He leaned back on his elbows. "You're not what I expected when I moved here." "Same," she said. "I thought you'd be boring." He laughed, and it made her smile without meaning to. The town's annual bonfire was that weekend. He hadn't planned on going. But when Aubrey showed up at his door, cheeks flushed from the wind, holding 2 mugs of cider and a beanie that definitely wasn't his, he didn't hesitate. "Come on," she said. "You haven't done Windermere right until you've been to the beach bonfire." Down at the shore, the fire was taller than any of the kids dancing around it. He followed her through the crowd until they found a spot near the water. People greeted her with familiarity. She was the kind of woman who made everyone feel like they belonged. Someone handed her a marshmallow on a stick. She passed it to him. "I don't think I've done this since college," he said, holding it near the flame. "Then you're due." A gust of wind blew her hair across her face. He reached over, tucking it behind her ear without thinking. She didn't pull away. "I like this version of you," she said quietly. "The one that shows up." He looked at her, heart pounding in a way that had nothing to do with fire or wind. "I didn't know he existed until I met you." The marshmallow caught fire. Neither of them noticed. Later, while the flames crackled behind them and the stars blinked awake overhead, she turned to him. "I don't want this to be something you forget when you go back to wherever you came from. I'm not going back. You say that now. I mean it. I bought this house because I needed to breathe again. I didn't know I'd find someone who'd make me want to stay for something more." She didn't respond, not right away, but her hand found his, and she didn't let go, not even when the fire burned down to embers. Callum hadn't planned on staying in Windermere Cove past the fall. But the leaves had turned, the air had cooled, and still, he was there trading boardrooms for hardware stores, late-night taxi rides for sunrise walks by the water. And Aubrey was no longer just the woman next door. She was the first person who made him feel like the ground beneath him wasn't constantly shifting. She was also the only person who'd ever told him he was being ridiculous while holding a crowbar. "I'm just saying," she muttered through a mouthful of screws, "you don't need to gut the entire kitchen because the backsplash is outdated." Callum stood with his arms crossed, eyeing the worn tile. "It's not just outdated, it's offensive." "You're offensive," she muttered, reaching for the drill. He laughed, but she didn't look up. She was focused, brow furrowed, elbow deep in cabinetry. He watched her work, admiring how she moved with a kind of competence that couldn't be taught. It made his chest tighten. "I have a dinner thing in the city tomorrow," he said after a pause. She sat back on her heels. "A dinner thing, an industry fundraiser, old contacts. I promised I'd show my face." She stood and wiped her hands on her jeans. "So go, no one's chaining you to this porch." "I was hoping you'd come," she blinked. "To Manhattan, it's just a few hours, I'll drive." "Stay the night, you'll be back by breakfast." Aubrey crossed her arms. "You want me to meet your old world?" "I want to see what it looks like with you there." She studied him. "You sure about that?" "I've never been more sure of anything." The next evening, she stepped out of his SUV in front of a limestone townhouse on the Upper East Side, dressed in a navy jumpsuit and boots that had seen better days. He didn't comment. He only offered her his arm, and she took it, even though her shoulders were tense. Inside, the room buzzed with low laughter and the clink of champagne flutes. Women in silk dresses eyed Callum with recognition. Men in tailored suits clapped him on the back and called him Mac. Aubrey stayed close, quiet. She didn't shrink, but she didn't pretend either. A woman with sharp cheekbones and an accent that didn't belong to any coast leaned in. "We were wondering if you'd disappeared off the grid entirely," she said to Callum. Her eyes slid to Aubrey. "And you are, Aubrey," she said plainly. "I fix things." The woman blinked. "Well, everyone needs a hobby." Callum's voice cut through, smooth and cold. "She runs her own business." "It's not a hobby." The woman smiled tightly and moved on. Aubrey turned to him once they were alone by the bar. "You don't have to defend me." "I wasn't," he said. "I was defending my own taste." She softened just a little. "This world, it's not mine. It's not mine anymore either." They left before dessert. On the drive back to the hotel, she stared out the window. "I get it now," she said quietly. "What? Why you left all this behind?" He glanced at her. "You think I'm crazy? I think you were right." They didn't talk much after that, but when they got to the suite, he reached for her hand. She didn't pull away. The room overlooked the park, glittering below like a spread of stars. He poured her a glass of wine while she kicked off her boots and sat cross-legged on the couch. "You had a life here," she said, watching him. "I had a performance." He sat beside her. "I was always chasing something that moved faster the closer I got. Then I showed up next to a woman who yelled at a seagull and offered me a wrench." "You're not romantic," she said, though her mouth was curved. "I could be," he said, "if I thought it would matter." She leaned into him, resting her head against his shoulder. Later, as they lay in the quiet, her breath steady against his chest, he whispered, "I don't want to do this halfway." She lifted her head. "What are you saying?" "I want to build something with you, for real, not part-time. Not just when it's convenient." Aubrey sat up, pulling the sheet around her. "Callum, my life's messy. I don't have a 5-year plan. I can't promise anything polished." "I'm not asking for polished," he said, sitting up too. "I'm asking for honest." She searched his face. "You're serious?" "I've never been anything else with you." Back in Windermere Cove, things shifted. Callum stopped referring to the house as the place. He started calling it home. Aubrey left her truck in his driveway more often than not. Her dog, Bear, had claimed his sunroom as his new kingdom. One morning, Callum stood outside her workshop with a blueprint in hand. "What's that?" she asked, wiping her hands on a rag. "An idea." She took it, unfolded it, and frowned. "This is my garage, I know." "Look at the second page." She flipped it and her eyes widened. "You want to turn it into a custom workspace? Bigger tools, new benches, storage for your truck, and a lift so you don't have to crawl under anything again." She looked up at him, stunned. "Why would you do this?" "Because your work deserves better than rotting floorboards and a faulty breaker." Tears threatened, but she blinked them back. "I can't pay you back for this." "I'm not asking you to," she swallowed. "You planning on sticking around long enough to see it finished?" "I was thinking forever," her breath caught. "That's a long time. I'm a patient man." She stepped forward, resting her hands against his chest. "I'm still scared," she admitted. "So am I," he said. "But I'd rather be scared with you than safe without you." And just like that, she kissed him, deliberate, certain, and more than a promise. It was a beginning. The kind that didn't come with fireworks or declarations shouted into stormy skies, just the solid, aching truth. They were choosing each other, and neither of them was running anymore. The first snow came early that year. It dusted the rooftops with a light, powdery layer and turned the narrow streets of Windermere Cove into something out of a postcard. Callum stood by the window of his bedroom, coffee in hand, watching Bear chase snowflakes across the frozen lawn with the same reckless joy his owner had brought into Callum's life. Aubrey was in the kitchen, humming off-key as she rummaged through a drawer. She pulled out a tangled mess of string lights and held them up like a trophy. "Found them. I knew I kept these for a reason." Callum raised a brow. "I thought you didn't do decorations." "I don't do tacky ones. These are charming, rustic, possibly a fire hazard." He set down his coffee. "You planning to burn my house down?" "Not unless you keep complaining about my aesthetic choices." They spent the morning stringing lights along the porch railing, arguing about the best way to wrap them around the columns. Aubrey balanced on a step stool, unbothered by the cold, while Callum handed her zip ties like it was a high-stakes construction project. Later, she dragged him to the town square, where the annual holiday market had transformed the plaza into a maze of wooden booths, cinnamon-scented air, and bundled-up families. A brass band played carols near the gazebo. Aubrey pointed to a vendor selling handmade ornaments. "Pick one." "For what?" "For your tree." "I don't have a tree, you do now. I cut one this morning. It's in your garage." "You cut down a tree and stashed it in my garage without telling me." "I didn't think you'd mind." He stared at her, then shook his head slowly. "You're impossible, and you're predictable. That's why I brought a saw." They picked out an ornament shaped like a tiny hammer. Aubrey handed it to the vendor, then turned to Callum. "I think Bear should get his own too. You're going to make him vain." "He's already vain." "He won't sleep unless his blanket is folded." That night, they trimmed the tree together. Callum carefully unwrapped a small box and pulled out a silver star. "I've had this since I was a kid," he said, offering it to her. "Thought maybe you should be the one to put it on." Aubrey looked at him, surprised. "You sure?" He nodded. "It's time it meant something again." She stepped onto the stool and placed it on top, then looked down at him. "There, now it's perfect." The next morning, a letter arrived. Callum opened it at the kitchen table, brows knitting as he read. Aubrey poured 2 mugs of coffee before noticing the shift in his expression. "What is it?" she asked. He hesitated. "It's from a firm I used to work with. They want me to consult on a project in London, 6 months, high profile." "Big money." She set the mugs down. "Are you going?" "I haven't said yes, but you're thinking about it." He met her eyes. "I'd be lying if I said I wasn't. It's a part of me I thought I buried, but it's still there." Aubrey stepped back, arms crossing. "So what happens now?" "I don't know." She nodded slowly, jaw set. "Well, let me know when you figure it out." He reached for her hand, but she turned and walked out the door. The next few days passed in a quiet tension. She still came by Bear insisted, but the easy rhythm between them had cracked. He caught her staring out at the water more than once, and every time he tried to speak, she changed the subject. One evening, he stood outside her workshop, watching the lights flicker through the window. He knocked and waited. She opened the door, brush in hand, her face unreadable. "I'm not going," he said. She blinked. "Why not?" "I thought about it, about the money, the status. But I realized something." He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "I've had everything people say you should want. I've been the guy with the Skyline office and the 6-digit watch, but none of it ever stopped me from feeling like something was missing." Aubrey leaned against the workbench, silent. "I found it here," he continued. "In a town with 1 traffic light, in a garage that leaks when it rains, in you." She looked down, her voice quiet. "I didn't want to be the reason you stayed. I wanted you to choose it for yourself." "I did," he said. "But I'd be lying if I said you weren't the reason I opened my eyes." She crossed the room slowly. "You're really staying." "I bought the lot down by the pier. I'm building a space for us, for your work, for whatever comes next." Her breath caught. "You bought the lot." "I had the plans drawn up yesterday. Not a garage, not a house, something that belongs to both of us." Aubrey stared at him, eyes shining. "You didn't even ask me." "I didn't think I had to. I just hoped." She let out a breath, then reached for his hand. "You're an idiot," she whispered. "I know. But you're my idiot." He leaned in and kissed her, slow and certain. Weeks passed. Snow thickened. The lot was cleared. Together they laid the first beam of what would become a shared space, half studio, half office, with wide windows and cedar walls. On a clear morning in January, they stood outside the frame of the new building, frost in their hair and coffee steaming in their hands. "I never thought I'd end up here," Callum said. Aubrey looked at him. "And now, I can't imagine being anywhere else." She slid her hand into his. "Then let's stay," she said. "For a long, long while." And when Bear barked from the truck, tail wagging like he knew exactly what had been promised, they both laughed together, exactly where they were meant to be. The wind had shifted by early spring, carrying that first whisper of warmth through Windermere Cove, the kind that made the sea look less gray and the trees start to stretch. On a drizzly Thursday morning, Callum stood inside the skeleton of the building rising at the edge of his property. It wasn't finished yet, but the walls were up, the roof was sealed, and the scent of fresh cut cedar hung in the air. He traced his fingers along the edge of the window frame, imagining the shelves Aubrey would line with her tools, the long workbench she'd insisted on placing under the light. She walked in behind him, wiping rain from her cheeks. "You beat me here, you're late," he said, turning to her. "That's new." "I stopped at the bakery," she said, holding up a paper bag. "Hazelnut croissants. Figured this place needs a christening." He took the bag and pulled one out. "You know, I haven't had one of these since Paris." She set her jacket down on a pile of unopened paint cans and leaned against the wall. "You've been to Paris." "Twice, both times for work. Never saw the inside of a museum, though." "That's a tragedy," she muttered, biting into hers. "You should fix that." "I was thinking we could." She glanced at him, a crumb clinging to her lip. You mean, go, not tomorrow, but someday, together? He stepped closer. You said you like things that are built, not bought. I want to build a life that fits us. She looked around the room, raw wood, open space, possibilities. This place is already starting to feel like it. Outside, the rain had stopped. The sky cracked open into a pale blue, and the sea beyond their view rolled in a little gentler. Aubrey wiped her hands on her jeans. I've been thinking about something. Callum raised an eyebrow. I want to offer apprenticeships for girls, high schoolers who want to learn trades but don't think they're allowed to. We've got the space now and the tools. He nodded. Then we find the funding. We hire someone to help coordinate it. You lead the workshops, I'll handle the rest. You're serious? I'm not half anything with you. She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around his waist. You make it hard to argue with you. That's the idea. Late that afternoon, they drove an hour north to pick up salvaged barn doors from a woman who specialized in reclaimed wood. On the way back, they stopped at a roadside diner she loved, where the waitress knew her by name and didn't bother bringing menus. They shared a slice of lemon pie and talked about what color the front door should be. He wanted navy. She wanted forest green. I'll let you win, he said, finishing his coffee, but only if you agree to let me paint the inside cabinets dark blue. You just want to be right even when you're wrong. I want to build something we both see ourselves in. That night, Callum stood under the stars with her, both of them barefoot on the porch. The air was cool enough to make them lean into each other. She rested her chin on his shoulder. I've never let anyone in like this, she said. He turned his head toward her. I've never had anything worth staying still for before you. She took his hand and pressed something into it. He opened his palm. It was a key, a small brass one. It's for the back door of my place, she said, in case you're ever locked out or just want to come in without knocking. I'll still knock, he said, but I'll be glad to have it. By the end of May, the building was finished. Aubrey had already moved her tools in. Callum had set up a small office in the corner, mostly for show. He still liked sketching designs on paper more than using a screen. One Saturday, the town gathered for the open house. There were paper lanterns strung from the beams, a table full of food from local vendors, music from an old record player spinning somewhere in a corner. People wandered through, admiring the space. A few asked about the future programs. Aubrey answered every question with quiet confidence, her hand occasionally finding Callum's when no one was looking. Near the end of the night, the mayor offered a toast. To the woman who fixes everything, he said, nodding toward Aubrey, and the man who finally figured out how to stay in one place. Callum raised his glass, but his eyes were only on her. Later, after the guests had left and the last lantern had been unhooked, he led her outside into the field behind the building. The grass was tall and soft, and the moon had risen full and low. I wanted to wait until today, he said, pulling something from the inside pocket of his jacket. Aubrey stepped back slightly, unsure, until she saw what he was holding. It wasn't a traditional ring box. It was a small piece of driftwood, hollowed and sanded smooth with a silver band inside. Simple, clean. Engraved on the inside were 3 words, "You fixed me." I don't need a ceremony, he said, or a guest list, or even a date. I just want to know if you'll say yes. She looked down at it, then up at him. You really think you're ready for this kind of forever? He stepped closer. I think I've spent enough time running from everything that mattered. I don't want to waste another minute. She reached out and took the ring. Then yes, you're stuck with me. They kissed under the moonlight, barefoot in the grass, no witnesses but the stars and the sea air that had first brought them together. A year later, they stood in a small clearing near the cliffs outside town, surrounded by wildflowers and the handful of people who mattered. Bear wore a bow tie. Aubrey wore a white linen dress that fluttered in the breeze. Callum hadn't stopped smiling since she walked toward him. There was no aisle, no altar, just a promise spoken between 2 people who had built something real, piece by piece. Afterward, they walked hand in hand back to the workshop, now filled with students' projects, blueprints, and the scent of cedar and motor oil. It had become more than a building. It was a beginning, a home, a legacy. Inside, the light caught the corner of a framed photo on the wall, a candid shot of them laughing, grease on her cheek, his hand in her hair. Underneath, someone had scrawled in chalk, "Start where you are, build what you need," and that's exactly what they did. Together, always.